In today's presentation, our objectives in terms of learning are as follows. Why the land remediation section is managing inquiries differently now than in the past. What types of inquiries the section receives on a daily basis. The one-window approach for managing all incoming inquiries. And common inquiries which will be referred to others, and recognition that there can be limitations on the responses provided by the section. Next slide, please. The land remediation section began reviewing how it manages inquiries in 2018 as part of a broader business improvement project. At that time, the section was experiencing an increasing volume of inquiries from environmental consultants, local government, Indigenous groups, and contaminated site stakeholders. As a result of that project, the section implemented a more unified, structured, primarily email-based approach to managing inquiries in early 2020. The section has now fully adopted a one-window approach to managing inquiries, which will be discussed in greater detail later in this presentation. I will now discuss what the management of inquiries at the ministry was like before implementation of the new approach, the implementation process itself, and what the ministry has learned during implementation. Next slide, please. Several challenges were identified with the land remediation section's previous approach to managing inquiries. These challenges became drivers for change. The main challenge identified was the combination of a high volume of inquiries and the direction of many of those inquiries to individual staff in the program. The absence of a more centrally coordinated and managed approach to inquiries gave rise to a number of issues. For example, program staff receiving emails or telephone calls directly may not, in some cases, have been the most appropriate individual to consider and respond to the inquiry. Sometimes the staff receiving an inquiry may no longer have been with the program, or they may no longer have been working on a specific file or project. In most cases, redirection of these direct-to-staff inquiries took place in the past, but as we all know, particularly in the context of telephone calls, it doesn't take much for conversations to lengthen when staff wish to be helpful to clients who have good questions and often express the urgency of their circumstances. Direct-to-staff inquiries also prevented the program from providing a fair and equitable service to all those seeking information from the ministry, from property owners and developers, their professional advisors such as consultants and lawyers, as well as Indigenous peoples. It's also important to note that there's no mechanism for the program to provide advice, direction, or approval over the phone, as it circumvents the contaminated site service application and formal decision-making process. Not only does it sidestep these important processes, direct-to-staff engagement on new issues redirects resources away from review and assessment of applications previously submitted and underway and increases queue times for others. In many cases, responses provided by telephone or email in the past may not have had the benefit of sufficient and accurate information from clients to be able to provide a reliable response in short order. Concerns also arose whereby callers relied upon the content of conversations to subsequently make formal applications to the ministry for consideration by a different, independent decision maker. The program also experienced, not uncommonly, questions being directed to more than one ministry staff member without these staff members being made aware. Finally, the program's previous approach to managing incoming inquiries was not capable of conveniently documenting the nature and frequency of inquiries so that additional value could be pursued in terms of identifying areas for further policy development and for reporting out more generally about the significance of the program's workload on the inquiry front. Next slide, please. Inquiry management was implemented in March 2020 to address the shortcomings of the old process. Inquiry management has evolved over time to streamline internal processes and respond meaningfully to feedback from clients. To better streamline inquiry management, each email inbox typically has 2 inbox coordinators that receive incoming inquiries, catalog them, and then assign them to appropriate persons for follow-up. Some of the feedback received indicated that clients submitting inquiries to the section wanted an acknowledgement of the receipt of the inquiry. This has been done via auto-response email indicating that the inquiry will be assigned. The Ministry is aware of the desire for an improved user experience, including personalized responses of receipt and the ability to track the progress of the response. The Ministry is considering this feedback to inform future improvements to the system. Please note that if the inquiry is expected to take longer than 1 hour of staff time, then fees are applicable, as described in Schedule 3 of the Contaminated Sites Regulation. If the person assigned to the inquiry expects it to take longer than 1 hour, they will request a Contaminated Site Services application form before starting to respond. Next slide, please. The section aims to respond to inquiries within 2 to 4 weeks upon receipt. Observations to date indicate that average turnaround times are approximately 2 business weeks. Although average turnaround times are typically within the targeted response time of 2 weeks, the section does acknowledge that some inquiries can take longer. Next slide, please. Although the new process can no longer accommodate cold calls and emails to specific staff, the section believes that the process strikes an improved balance for both clients and the Ministry's oversight of the Contaminated Sites regulatory regime. Qualitative observations indicate an increased consistency in response quality and an increased quality/focus of submitted inquiries. The data also provides a necessary basis and metrics for program staff workload management, for policy improvements, and for resourcing staff members to specific types of inquiries or topic areas. This section is also using this information to work on website improvements and future updates to protocols and guidance materials, for example, if risk assessment requires the submission of a notice of independent remediation. Next slide, please. Inquiries can be broken down into 2 main categories: questions that are regarding a specific site with either a site ID number or location information that can be used to derive the site ID number, and non-site specific inquiries, which are typically questions pertaining to policy, guidance, or other regulatory process. Next slide, please. Site-specific inquiries either have a site ID number or reference location information, which allows Ministry staff to determine if the site is on the registry. There are currently over 25,000 sites on the site registry, which can be considered a digital index of available information. Sites listed on the site registry can be viewed using IMAP-BC. Knowing and providing the site ID number for these inquiries enables faster turnaround times, as relevant information can be quickly retrieved, such as notations and available reports. Please note that if you have a site ID number, you can use BC Online to request a site detail report, which may list available reports, notations, site profiles, or site disclosure statements, and other pertinent information. Next slide, please. A non-site specific inquiry is usually either a hypothetical site that is described or a question pertaining to policy, guidance, or other regulatory process. These range from simple to complex. Simple inquiries can typically be answered by referencing the appropriate site remediation webpage. Complex inquiries may require a Contaminated Site Services application form, extended review times, and/or legal review. Next slide, please. The section uses a one-window approach, which can best be described as one window with 6 panes. The one-window approach utilizes 6 email inboxes, each with a set of designated topic areas. Inquiries to the Ministry should be submitted using one of the 6 inboxes. These include general information, general site information, site identification, site risk classification, Contaminated Site Services applications, and regulatory and technical questions on site investigation and remediation. Next slide, please. The general information inbox should be used for inquiry topics pertaining to the site remediation website, site remediation news, and other inquiry topic areas not listed in the preceding slides. Next slide, please. The general site information inbox should be used for inquiry topics pertaining to site information requests, notifications of independent remediation and offsite migration, the site registry, and site-specific inquiries. For example, if you have a site ID number and are requesting information on that site. However, please note that much of the information requested can be located on the site registry. And if you are wondering if your site is on the site registry, the IMAP BC waste layer has an option for environmental remediation sites, which displays the sites listed on the site registry. Please stick around for the next talk, which will go into more detail on using IMAP BC. Next slide, please. The site identification inbox should be used for inquiry topics pertaining to site identification, including site disclosure statements, release notice applications, approved professional statements, annual updates, site investigation reports, and confirmation of remediation reports. Next slide, please. The site risk classification inbox should be used for inquiry topics pertaining to Protocol 12, such as site risk classification reports, exposure pathway questionnaires, and site reclassification. Next slide, please. The Contaminated Site Services Applications inbox should be used for inquiry topics pertaining to the application for services, forms, and relating supporting information requesting a service, technical addendums, or additional reports prepared to support an application and fees and/or invoices. Next slide, please. The regulatory and technical questions on site investigation inbox should be used for inquiry topics pertaining to legislation, regulations, protocols, pre-approvals, policy, guidance, resources, and authorizations for site remediation, such as approvals and permits. Next slide, please. Sometimes the land remediation section receives inquiries which need to be considered and responded to by others in government. These inquiries can include concerns and complaints about possible pollution in the environment, such as spills and illegal dumping, questions or concerns about environmental protection or other laws not overseen by the land remediation section. For example, when the inquiry is related to non-contaminated sites-related waste discharge authorizations. And questions more appropriately directed to the responsible person for a site and not the regulator. The ministry will refer the inquiry to the appropriate program or provide direction on who best to contact. For inquiries related to liability and purchasing of contaminated properties, it is best to seek advice from legal counsel and other professionals. Next slide, please. For environmental emergencies, including spills, as well as other potential infractions of the Environmental Management Act, persons are requested to report their observations online or by phone to the RAP line. Other programs in the ministry are responsible for responding to spills and for overseeing the pollution prohibitions of the Environmental Management Act. A common example is the illegal dumping of waste or garbage on a property. Next slide, please. Waste discharge authorization inquiries, for example, permits, approvals, and operational certificates for discharges that are not related to contaminated sites, which is everything that is not considered contaminated site contaminant management in the waste discharge regulation, should be submitted to the waste discharge application inquiries at gov.bc.ca email, or preferably through the online form on the waste discharge authorizations website. Please note that all applications for a waste discharge authorization, even for contaminated site contaminant management, are initially processed by the Regional Operations Branch via the permit administration.victoriaepd@gov.bc.ca inbox. Inquiries regarding authorizations for contaminated site contaminant management should be directed to remediation FAQs at gov.bc.ca. Next slide, please. It may not be surprising to most attendees that there may be limitations to the ministry's ability to respond to inquiries, especially when it comes to inquiries that are site or issue specific. The ministry does not typically provide assurances about the environmental condition or regulatory status of a site outside of a formal application review and decision-making process. The ministry conveys its position on these matters through certifications such as determinations of a contaminated site or certificates of a compliance, or perhaps in a letter issued by a director under the Environmental Management Act. It will typically be necessary for persons with these interests to seek the independent professional advice of an environmental consultant or lawyer who is familiar with the site remediation regulatory framework in BC and the specific site of interest. Because the contaminated sites regime is a legal regulatory framework, it is necessary for the section to advise that information is provided for guidance only. For example, a response to an inquiry cannot change any laws, nor can it limit an independent statutory decision maker's discretion under the law. These are important limitations to keep in mind when formulating inquiries to the ministry. The more focused and appropriate an inquiry is, the more expedient it will be for the ministry to respond. Next slide, please. I've included a few resources so you can easily reference important email addresses. The Site Remediation webpage has a description of which email is best for each topic. And a recap of today's learning objectives: why the land remediation section is managing inquiries differently now than in the past, what types of inquiries the section receives on a daily basis, the one-window approach for managing all incoming inquiries, and common inquiries which will be referred to others, and a realization that there are limitations on the responses that can be given by the section. Thank you for listening and have a great day.